$60? I exclaimed, staring at my phone as though it just insulted me. Huh? Beth asked from beside me. Damn elf on a shelf.
Seriously?
My wife questioned. We already had a Christmas list as long as my arm, between our parents, nieces and nephews, and our darling baby girl. Lily, named after Harry Potter's mother, had just turned 5 in August, and she had talked about that damn elf for the past 3 weeks straight. Emily, her best friend, conveniently located in the house next to ours, already had hers out since before Thanksgiving. Of course, her folks spoiled her a good bit, as she was an only child, and they are far more well off than us. She's a good kid, though. Lily loved her like a sister, and she's almost like a second kid to us, as she spends just as much time at our place as her own. Yeah, her parents give her every little thing she asks for, but she wasn't a brat or anything, just an incredibly happy little girl. Unfortunately, everything that she got, our daughter wanted too. We'd already stocked up on most of what Lily had asked for from dear old Santa, but we still had to shop for everyone else on our list, one that appeared longer every time we looked at the bloody thing. Oh yeah, we checked it twice and then some, but for every name we crossed off, there was another waiting behind it. Money was always pretty tight this time of year, so another $60 for a stuffed little git we'd have to readjust before bed every night was adding far more frustration than necessary. I hated the idea of disappointing my little girl, especially at Christmas, so I decided to bite the bullet and cough out the $60 for the stupid little elf. That was until my wife practically rammed her phone in front of my face. She had apparently been doing more searching while I continued my staring contest with the add to cart link. What she managed to track down was some sort of knockoff elf, but it honestly looked much cuter to me than the creepy blank wide-eyed stare of the leading brand. Also, it was a little female elf with a red and green striped dress. That would surely be more to Lily's liking, and the $20 price tag was sure as hell more to mine.
What you think?
Beth asked. Hell yes, I replied, chuckling slightly. Without another word, my wife hit the buy it now option, and we crossed one more headache off our Christmas list. Sure, we weren't even close to being done yet, but our successful endeavor allowed us to sleep soundly. Within only 3 days, the package was dropped off at our front door. Lily wouldn't be home from school for another 2 hours, so we still had plenty of time to unwrap the little elf and have her all prepared to be given a name by our daughter, as was the tradition, according to our research anyway. To our surprise, we opened the box to see that 2 elves were concealed within. The cute little pigtailed girl with the red and green striped dress, and an equally as adorable boy elf wearing a green and white tunic with red pants. They both had the same red pointed hat upon their noggins and a wide smile stitched onto their faces. My wife double-checked the order information and even sent an email to the folks we had bought them from to make sure there hadn't been a mistake. They actually replied fairly quickly and assured us that they had only sent the one we purchased. They shrugged off the whole thing and just told us that if we had received 2, we were welcome to hold on to them both. Left to assume that we had just scored a minor holiday lottery win, we decided to let our little girl name them both, and they could share the responsibility of watching over her for the season. The fact that Emily only had 1 and Lily would have 2 brought a smile to my face. It's not often our daughter could have something her BFF didn't. When Lily got off the bus, she was so excited to see the duo perched on the shelf together. She jumped around and spun in circles with excitement. I couldn't help but smile at the sight. That kid could light up an underground tunnel in the middle of the night. She dubbed her new overseers Lulu and Pip, and she continued to steal glances at them sitting on the fireplace for the rest of the day. She desperately wanted to pick them up and play with them like her dolls, but we assured her that they could not be touched by human hands lest they lose their magical powers. According to her research, that's how the mythology of these things was supposed to work in the eyes of a child, though the whole thing did seem quite silly to me. After we put our daughter to bed for the night, we went about the arduous task of moving the elves to a new location, as is the tradition. We decided to keep them together on one of our living room shelves for the time being. Surely we would get more creative as the month went on, but this was our first time dealing with this, so best to keep it simple for now. We wrapped their little arms around each other's shoulders while they sat waiting for Lily to be observed the following day, before we headed up to our own bedroom for the night.
Did you hear that?
Beth asked, nudging me awake while she sat upright beside me. Huh?
I think someone's in the house.
Her voice was trembling and nervous as she spoke, in little more than a whisper. I was still somewhat hungover from being pulled from a deep sleep, but the fear in my wife's voice quickly brought me to more awareness. I'll go check it out, I said before climbing out of bed and staggering towards the lockbox on the top shelf of our closet. I turned the combination lock to open the box which held our hope we never need it pistol, and I walked softly to the door to her bedroom, while Beth tried to talk me out of going downstairs. I'll be okay, hon, I said, attempting to reassure my wife, though it did little to assist her bordering on frantic state. Just lock the door behind me, and I'll be back before you know it. I gave her a wink and a smile before venturing out into the dark house. After I gently closed the door, I heard the clicking of the lock behind me. I could hear something of a rustling sound. It didn't seem like someone digging through drawers while looking for valuables. If anything, it sounded more like an animal had somehow gotten inside. I could make out the tapping of tiny legs and the occasional object being knocked to the floor. As I approached the bottom step, those borderline gentle noises gave way to something far more agitated and frenzied. I felt my heart attempt to leap into my throat when a loud slam came from the kitchen, followed by shattering glass and splintering wood. Without taking the time to consider my actions, I ran for the dining room that stood next to the kitchen, bounced around the corner, and extended my gun out in front of me. "Get the hell out of my house or I swear I'll bust some caps." The phrase sounded a lot more intimidating in my head, but my vocal tones did not lend themselves particularly well to threats of caps busting. Had it not been for the situation at hand, I may have either shrank away from whatever lay ahead in embarrassment, or cracked up at my own stupidity. Though my face flushed a little from my ridiculous statement, my heart still hammered against my sternum as I stared into the seemingly empty kitchen. Everything had fallen silent while I glared into the dark room. I reached out a slightly trembling hand while keeping the one that held my gun as steady as possible. Shoot, caps actually require busting. I flipped the light switch on and instantly gripped both hands around my weapon, aiming it in the direction of my innocent stove. I did my best impression of an overly dramatic movie private investigator with my legs spread wide and slightly bent to the knees. I maintained this silly posture as I leapt from the dining room into the kitchen, almost gashing my foot open on the broken glass on the floor. I let my arms fall to my sides while I took in the shattered mugs and glasses on the kitchen floor before turning on the living room lights to see picture frames, remote controls, and some Christmas ornaments strewn across the carpet. I saw absolutely no sign of any late-night invaders after checking everywhere on the ground floor. The front door was locked, as were all the windows, but clearly someone or something had been inside. I scratched my head with the barrel of the gun before I recalled and wondered what the hell I was thinking. I flipped the safety latch back and headed back upstairs to let my wife know everything appeared to be okay. I returned the gun to the lockbox before heading back down to clean up the broken glass, as Lily would often wake up before us, and I didn't want her getting scared or cut. After everything was free of shrapnel again, I gave one final glance around the house before heading back up to my bedroom, hoping to salvage what was left of the night's rest.
I'm so glad you didn't have to bust any caps,
Beth said with a giggle when I slid into bed beside her. By the time I dragged myself out of bed the following morning, I staggered down the steps to find Beth and Lily wearing similarly puzzled expressions.
Are they mad at each other?
My daughter asked, pointing at the elves who now sat on opposite sides of the living room. Not only were neither of them perched where we left them the previous night, but they were each on shelves at opposing sides of the room, with their backs faced away from one another. I looked at my wife, feeling like my confused expression was very similar to the one she wore, while Lily appeared a little sad.
Did they have a fight?
She asked, looking up at me with her adorable big brown eyes, shimmering with burgeoning tears. No, baby girl. I'm sure they just want to be able to look around a bit while they're visiting, I said, crouching down to look my little girl in the face. I can't say her question didn't awaken a barrage of completely irrational thoughts in the back of my head, given the calamity of the night before, but surely not, right? I just stared at the two brightly colored little elves as they blankly gazed in opposing directions. I couldn't quite figure out how or why they had moved from the spot we had left them. Started to question my daughter if she had broken the sacred rules of the North Pole and played with the two, but I truly was not in the mood to interrogate my child over something so trivial, so I pushed it to the back of my mind and went on about my day like any other. After putting Lily to bed that night and giving her ample time to actually fall asleep, Beth and I made the silent decision to keep the two elves separated. Whether our little girl had indeed moved the two, or some nefarious villain had broken into her home to smash some things and play a practical joke on us before relocating the elves and locking the door behind them, we thought it best to just go with it. We discussed the possibility that our daughter may have developed the same need to sleepwalk as my wife had in her childhood, but either way, we were not going to lose sleep over it. We planted the girl elf on the mantel and had the boy peering out from the Christmas tree. Nothing fancy or especially inventive, but good enough, we thought. I waited a while before laying down to sleep that night while making a few visits to Lily's room to ensure she was sleeping soundly. After I was content that everything was settled and well, I finally lay my weary head to rest. I was entertaining quite the bizarre dream, featuring our two little plush elves performing a delicately choreographed assortment of parkour tricks around our living room, when a loud bang jerked me from my slumber. I practically leapt from the bed when the sound echoed from the ground floor, while my wife sat straight up beside me once more. Without a word to each other, I ran out of the room, not taking the time to unlock the gun, as my rational mind was still of the belief that Lily was indeed sleep-staggering around downstairs. I flipped every light switch I passed on the way back to the living room, prepared to see my daughter by the Christmas tree or mantel, but I saw no signs of anyone again. Though there was no visible evidence of an intruder, besides the tree that now lay sideways on the floor and the bookshelf tipped over beside the fireplace, it was what I heard that sent shivers up my spine. It was like a series of quick and tiny sprinting footsteps accompanied by the giggling of something childlike. I could not deny that the sounds were beyond eerie, and my investigation had grown dramatically slower in my pursuit of whatever was wreaking havoc for the second night in a row. I could not see the little boy elf in the tree that lay on its side, nor the little girl on the mantel anymore. I was not willing to allow myself to believe that these two stuffed little rag dolls were in fact sentient and had rampaged the kitchen during a theoretical spat that led them to opposite sides of the living room, but I couldn't deny that I had a bit of the willies about the whole thing. I tiptoed my way back through the dining room and to the kitchen again, but the noises ceased as soon as I left the living room. I didn't see any manner of destruction or chaos in any of the other rooms, but I also could not find the two little stuffed elves either, even after I lifted the tree back to a standing position. After picking back up the ornaments scattered across the floor, I raised the bookstand back up, still finding no trace of my daughter's would-be watchers from the North Pole, by way of Amazon. After hastily placing everything back on the shelves, I gave up my search for the night, committing myself to making up some sort of excuse to Lily in the morning. I headed back up to bed, feeling more exhausted than I had the night before. I explained everything I had seen to my wife, choosing to leave out what I heard for the time being. I don't know if I was hearing things, and was still halfway in a dream state, or just simply losing my damn mind, but it was enough to urge me not to share this one little aspect of my journey downstairs.
Look, Daddy, they're not mad at each other anymore,
Lily said with a beaming smile when I strolled into the living room the following morning. What the actual fuck?
Isn't it great, hon?
Beth said, interrupting the potty mouth I was about to expose to my baby girl. Yep, I sighed. Totally great. In all honesty, I hated to even look at the two felt, smiling faces who sat right next to each other on the mantel, despite being completely hidden from me while I searched for them only hours before. The sensible part of my brain was still completely opposed to the ridiculous idea of these little assholes messing with me in the wee hours of the morning, but the far less logical chunk of my mind was all over the place. Could these glorified toys really be somehow capable of running around, pulling objects of considerably more weight than them down while rampaging through our house? Is it actually possible that they were in fact sinister little pranksters we had invited into our home? Surely not. Sort of thing doesn't exactly exist in the real world, right? Over the course of the next week, each night having similarly disturbing and annoying wake-up calls in the late night, I'd finally had enough. I knew it would break my baby girl's heart, but I had to be rid of the damn plush and brightly colored grinning demons, or whatever the hell they were. Once Lily was asleep, I told Beth I would be just a few minutes behind her when we decided to turn in for the night. I gave her a quick kiss before she headed up the steps, and as soon as our bedroom door closed behind her, I snatched up the dastardly little elves, tossed them into a plastic grocery bag, and carried them out to the garbage can. I breathed a sigh of relief when I closed the lid and strolled back into my home with a smile on my face. I locked the front door once more and headed to sleep beside my lovely wife. I knew I'd have to come up with some sort of excuse to explain the missing Santa Claus-appointed watchers in the morning, but for the time being, I felt more relaxed than I had since the beginning of the month. That was, until yet another slam broke me from my slumber, again sending me downstairs to investigate. After a quick search, I was surprised to find absolutely nothing out of sorts. No elves, no shattered debris, just a peacefully empty house as I had left it before hitting the sack. I convinced myself that it was just a dream this time, checked the door one last time, and made my way back upstairs, to hopefully sleep uninterrupted for the remainder of the night. Though the rest of the night had indeed been uneventful, I felt my heart leap into my throat when I approached the living room the following morning to find my beautiful daughter staring wide-eyed at the two sinister elves having somehow found their way back into the house. They just sat there innocently on top of the bookshelf. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How in the hell had they gotten back inside? Was that slam that awoke me several hours before the little devils breaking back into the house? I felt my sanity slipping away as I glared at the little faces whose smiles appeared to be mocking me while I locked eyes with their lifeless felt pupils. I knew that I had to put an end to the reign of tyranny, lest I find myself committed to a nut house by January. I decided to stay up that night without telling my wife what I was planning. She was also pretty freaked out about the strange occurrences of late, but she wasn't as prone to indulging in such wild theories as I, though I generally wasn't open to ridiculous ideas myself. Perhaps it was just that too many sleepless nights had left rationality out in the front lawn beside the garbage can. Maybe I was actually losing track of my marbles at this point. Either way, those elves would not see another morning, not if I could help it. I assured Beth that I just wanted to sleep in the living room that night to keep an eye on things, while trying to catch whatever had been playing games with us the last couple of weeks. She appeared a little sad that I would not be joining her in bed, but I told her it would just be for one night and I'd be back beside her tomorrow. She shrugged and bid me good night before giving me a kiss and heading upstairs, just as she had the night before. In a strange way, I felt like some sort of movie villain, deceiving the woman I loved to hide the murders I planned to commit after everyone else was asleep. I could picture myself wringing my fingers while cackling with mad laughter after the lights went out, but thankfully that was just in my head, I think. We hadn't bothered staging the elves in a new spot, as they were never where we left them by morning. I stared up at the two, who were still perched on top of the bookshelf they had knocked to the floor some days back, with malicious intent in my gaze. Oh yes, they would be facing a reckoning this night. No longer would they be allowed to dwell within my home, leaving chaos and terror in their wake. "This ends tonight," I said, another phrase that sounded better in my head than it did while giving the stink eye to a couple of stuffed dolls as I sat alone in my darkened living room. Once I was sure that my wife and daughter were sleeping soundly, I crept over to the shelf, not shifting my eyes from my waiting prey. I stalked towards them with both hands outstretched, ready to whip them from their wooden perch. I almost cackled like a madman after I snatched them from their post, while I trembled with the adrenaline that surged through me. With one in each hand, I swiftly made my way to the basement, where I kept all of my tools, some of which I actually knew how to use. I stopped in place when a step about halfway down let out a loud creak. I turned to look behind me, as though the coppers were only moments behind, ready to stick a fork in my murderous plot. After reassuring myself the fuzz were not on to me yet, I continued my descent, flipping on the light switch to activate the flickering fluorescence above my rarely used work table. I laid my 2 victims down on the wooden slab, pulling a length of duct tape across them both. Without giving myself a chance to back out, I reached for 2 barely used flathead screwdrivers, grabbing one in each hand, and thrusting them down into the chests of the elves. My heart was beating like a drum while I stared at the 2 pinned to the table with screwdrivers still protruding from their fluffy chest cavities. I then grabbed my shears to sever their heads and limbs from their impaled torsos. Sweat was dripping from my brow while my hands were trembling wildly as I performed my unlicensed surgery. Once my work was done, I gathered all their bits together and scattered them into a plastic bag. I wiped away all of the stray pieces of cloth and polyester stuffing, making sure to leave no evidence of my crime. I even wiped down my tools to leave no trace of fingerprints. I was breathing heavily as I snuck out of my front door with the now triple-layered bag of body parts. I cut my eyes from side to side, studying my dark and silent neighborhood as I crept through the brisk night air to dispose of my victims. I pulled open the lid to my trash can again, but this time I dug a hole in the garbage that lay within to bury my crime under the foul-smelling waste. I took one more glance across my street before making my way back into my home, turning back only once to double-check that the bag was indeed hidden to the casual onlooker. Once I was sure all was well, I returned inside and washed up before curling up on the couch and experiencing the best sleep I had in what felt like years.
Did you and Mommy have a fight?
My eyes opened to see my lovely daughter staring down at me with a slight sadness in her face. "No, cutie," I said, smiling up at her. "I was just restless last night, so I came down here so I wouldn't wake up Mommy." In an instant, her expression changed from melancholy to glowing with excitement. I swear, no matter how cluttered my mind or weary body, her smile could always make whatever troubled me feel far less significant. Well, that was usually the case anyway. Her happiness was not as contagious when she showed me what was making her particularly giddy this morning.
Did you see the elves?
She asked, jumping up and down and waving her arms around. No, I haven't," I replied, assuming she was perhaps wondering where they were, leaving me on the spot to come up with an excuse without letting her know they were currently rotting with the garbage. Before I could put together an alibi to cover my heinous deeds of the night before, I finally saw what my little girl was getting at. 4 elves now sat upon the mantel, glaring at me with their accusing stare. I could swear my heart stopped beating for a moment as all the blood sank from my face to somewhere around my now gurgling stomach. Not only had the 2 I had cut to bits found their way back to their resting spot, but 2 more identical to them sat on either side.
I wonder what happened to the new ones before they came here,
my daughter said, pointing at the fine stitches that held together the ones I had murdered only hours ago. She appeared to believe that the new arrivals were her previous overseers, and I was not about to correct her on that, though my mind was still in complete chaos while I stared slack-jawed at the assembly of stuffed watchers. Beth just shrugged at me when she walked in from the other room, shaking her head to indicate this was not her doing, though she was still unaware of my activities after she went to bed. I could feel my face twitch and my back tense up while I searched for anything to say. Regardless of Lily being overjoyed by the growing herd of elves, I had to find a way to end this for good. Over the course of the day, I spent a great deal of time searching the internet for any evidence that I was not just completely losing my mind. I browsed everything from Christmas lore to paranormal occurrences associated with the town in which we lived. I found little more than claims of hauntings and ghostly sightings a few towns over, but I'm sure about every town had its own share of supernatural experiences, or at least folks who believed they had seen such things. This did not help my current situation in the least. It was until I finally shared everything with my wife, including my atrocious account of the previous night's activities. She laughed harder than she had in years after I made my confession, but her laughter gave way to more concern when she investigated the now stitched-together dolls perched on the mantel. She could tell that I was being truthful about everything I had said after we talked a good deal more, and she too became worried about what could actually be going on in our home. We puzzled over any enemies we may have made over the years who could be playing such a bizarre practical joke on us, but we had none that we could think of. Finally, we decided to look into hiring some sort of investigator, though many who claimed to look into the stranger occurrences of the world often seemed a little less genuine in their motivations, but we knew the police would not remotely take us seriously. So, after a few more hours of scouring the internet, we narrowed down a few agencies within our home state and began to make some calls. Of the 4 we attempted to contact, only 1 had an answering service, and 2 of them quickly became annoyed at our apparently making fun of what they do for a living. The 4th and final number we reached out to, however, seemed to be far more interested in what we had to say. The woman who answered the phone asked me to hold on while she called out to one of her associates. A man with a kind voice introduced himself as Joshua Holden when he got on the line, and we explained our circumstances for the 5th time that day. After a little back and forth, the man asked for just a little while to do some research, but he sounded as though he at least had somewhat of an idea of what we were dealing with. I hung up the phone with the assurance that I could expect a call back within a few hours. While I waited, I tried everything I could to find distractions from the lifeless stare of the quartet of smiling felt faces glaring at me from the mantel. I spent a little while playing games with Lily, while my subconscious was putting together a plan to send the pointy-eared dolls to a fiery grave that night, should I not hear anything of use by the day's end. I found it difficult to focus on anything while I felt the 8 tiny eyes cutting through the back of my head, even when I didn't share the same room as them. Every now and then, I could swear I heard miniature legs scampering from behind me. I was sure I saw something moving quickly out of the corner of my eye more than once, but every time I turned to see absolutely nothing there. Plus the elves had not moved from their post at all, and not that I could tell anyway. After a few hours, the phone rang, with my newly formed, supernaturally knowledgeable contact on the other end. He informed me that it was quite unlikely that our little stuffed elves indeed harbored any sort of life, and what we were more likely dealing with was a kobold or a trow, though they were more often found in Germany and the Shetland Islands, respectively. He suggested that we may have in fact been housing them for quite some time, but they may have been insulted by us bringing the pointy-eared dolls into our home, seeing it as an insult or mockery. I had never heard of either, but he seemed of the impression that they were similar to fairy folk, though I was not ready to believe that they were a real thing either. From the information provided by Mr. Holden, along with my own research of these mischievous little critters, it would seem that I had only 2 options. Well, 3, if I was willing to move my family to a new home as soon as possible. Basically, I would have to either befriend or capture the creature. Making merry with the thing, which had caused my hair to start falling out, was not especially high on my list of priorities, but trying to capture it could lead to far more complications. I wasn't exactly keen on potentially angering any of the other little beasties that may lurk about, so perhaps the best and least troubling option would be making nice after all. That night, after Beth and Lily had headed to bed, I laid out a small mug of beer, along with a few leftovers from dinner. According to my research, this could be a good way to begin forming a more friendly relationship with our uninvited house guest. Once I had everything in position, I decided to lay down on the couch again, just in case things took another turn for the worse, or for the weird. We only had so many glasses left, and I hope to actually hang our pictures back on the wall someday soon. With the house having fallen silent, I allowed sleep to take hold of my weary body once more, while hoping to not reawaken until morning. Of course, that was wishful thinking at best. I found myself once more pulled from my slumber, though not with any loud crashing noises or otherwise chaotic sounds in the night. This time it was a series of prods to my chest that caused my eyes to spring back open. What I saw, standing beside the couch, was almost enough to convince me I was still sleeping, but given how bizarre my life had become of late, I only blinked and rubbed my eyes 3 or 4 more times before convincing myself I was indeed awake. It was maybe 3 feet tall, with reddish-orange skin, a long, wide nose, and pointed ears which poked out the sides of its head. He wore a dark brown tunic-like shirt and tan, baggy pants, which came down to large, bare feet. It appeared to be a male, given the pointed white beard on its chin and the matching hair on his head, which was tied back into a ponytail. Though the color of its hair would suggest otherwise, the facial features looked somewhat youthful, even with the stoic expression on the face. I just glared, unblinking at the creature, before it made a gesture with its hand to follow me. I felt almost in a daze as I watched the little guy around the corner, while slowly rising from the couch to stagger in pursuit. When I arrived in the dining room, the 4 elves were sitting in the center of the table, right beside the mug of beer and plate of leftovers, while the little reddish creature sat on the chair at the end of the table.
"What's solin' Weirton?"
It asked in a masculine yet squeaky voice. I only assumed he was asking something because his words ended in that slight upturn. Otherwise, I couldn't understand a bloody word he was saying. "Huh?" seemed a fitting response. He just looked at me with an annoyed and somewhat impatient expression, before clenching his jaw and cutting his eyes to the side. He appeared to be almost attempting to compose himself, before taking a deep breath and speaking once more.
"What are we gonna do about all this?"
He raised his eyebrows while making an exaggerated shrug, reminding me of the old movie posters where the protagonist was showing how exhausted he was by the shenanigans of one unexpected visitor or another. Not only that, but where his accent had seemed maybe German before, he now almost sounded more like a tiny Italian mob boss. I thought we could make peace," I said, still feeling very weird about communicating with this odd little guy.
"Can't be no peace until you get rid of them."
He sneered, pointing towards the small North Pole enforcers. "Okay, I tried to get rid of the damn things and you brought them back," I belted, suddenly losing my patience. "You're giving me some serious mixed signals here."
"You better cool it, big guy."
"Or what?"
"Oh, you think a little beer and some table scraps supposed to make it all better?"
He stood up on his chair with his hands on his hips.
"You disrespect me, I'ma disrespect you."
"You're in my house, little man," I exclaimed, getting to my feet.
"You sure you wanna do this?"
A mischievous and somewhat sinister grin worked its way across the scarlet face. "Oh, I've been waiting to do this for weeks." As soon as the words left my lips, the now enraged, glorified goblin leapt at me. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, with tightly clenched red fists pounding on my chest. For being so small in stature, he hit like someone twice his size. Still, once my knuckles made contact with the hair of his chinny chin chin, he knew I meant business.
"You hit like a dame,"
he said, spitting a thick wad of blood onto the floor. "Yeah, well, you hit like a damn little Tinkerbell."
"Hey, you watch your mouth."
He slugged me across the jaw, and I felt my head start to spin a little. Still reeling from his swing, I had enough reflexes to deflect his next attack before kicking him off of me and climbing back up to my feet. He rolled on the floor, tumbled, and sprung back at me, delving his head into my gut. I coughed and buckled over before lunging my knee into his face. At that point, both of us fell to the floor, while still feebly swatting at each other. After a few moments of recovery, we began to gather ourselves up, then half-heartedly tackled one another again. We were both grunting and cursing as we punched and jabbed at each other, until...
"What the hell is going on down here?"
Beth screamed out as she stood in the doorway of her destroyed living room. The little gremlin and I both stopped in our tracks, hanging our heads like guilty children. I rubbed the back of my neck while the red critter idly kicked his heels.
"Is that what's been causing all this ruckus lately?"
my wife asked, pointing at my opponent. Everything confrontational and confident faded away from the little fella's face, and he appeared downright embarrassed, as did I. Fortunately, our battle had not awakened Lily, by some miracle, and my wife's interjection in our duel finally paved the way for more adult conversation. Our would-be guest finally introduced himself as Barnaby, one of the members of a small group of kobolds who had arrived in this country by mistake some months back. They had each taken residence in one home or another across the state around the middle of the summer. they would try to keep their presence concealed from their new homeowners, while attempting to make themselves useful by carrying out meager and neglected chores. Minor cleaning, pest or insect control, making sure all of the dirty clothes made it to the laundry hamper, and other such things we normally wouldn't pay much attention to. He assured us that he never meant us any harm, but after we brought the little elves into the house, he took it as a sign that we had indeed noticed him and chose to mock him to run him out of our home. He had planned to make a formal introduction after the new year, but apparently lost his cool a little more than he had intended. After a lot of talking and a little proof of his God-given talents, shape-shifting, invisibility, and an impressive array of skills such as sewing, cleaning, and other crafty things that could come in handy around the house, we reluctantly came to an agreement. We would get rid of the offensive dolls, as long as he would play the part of the new family dog for the sake of our daughter. Lily wasn't even disappointed at the disappearance of Santa's watchers, after we told her she had been so good that not only did old Kris Kringle not require any more proof of her nature, but he rewarded her with a new, red, furry puppy. It was amazing how quickly the two took to each other, but while our home has returned to a content and mostly happy one, just in time for Christmas, I can't say I have as wonderful a relationship with our new roommate. To Lily and Beth, he is the most charming and respectful little goblin dog you could meet. But to me, far, far less. I can't say that his contempt is not mutual, but I'm sure we'll make it work for the girls. Every now and then, I still wake up in the middle of the night with a damned plush little elf sitting on my chest, glaring right at me with its lifeless eyes. But maybe we'll find common ground before long. Yeah, maybe I'll slip a little something in his nightly mug of beer, too. Don't worry, I'm done with murdering fantasy creatures in the wee hours of the morning, but a little laxative never hurt anyone. And just keep an ear out for the strange noises in the night this holiday season. And you might want to think twice before inviting an elf to sit upon your shelf.